Hello!
Hi!
Oh, man, are our viewers going to be excited for today? A whole episode talking just like this?
I can't add to it. Our viewer count went from 0 to negative.
That would be impressive.
Yeah. Somehow, we're getting negative viewers. Like they're actually working against us.
Yes.
The algorithms.
You know, it's all just an imaginary number, right? That's at least that's what I learned in school.
Negatives are?
Something like that, you know. Well, anyways, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good, man. It's 20 degrees outside, which is not normal for Texas. So
Yeah, bit nipply.
Yeah, it is. I end up somehow putting on like 3 or 4 different jackets because I don't know.
Well, you know, it's funny you said that because we have a guest today, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But last time he was on, you also talked about jackets, so I'm starting to wonder.
Well, I'm actually trying to get fitted for a straight jacket right now, so hopefully this guy can help with that.
Well, those are good for warmth. Keep the body nice and close. The only thing better, I think, would be to have 2 people inside a straight jacket. You know, it's like one of those things where it's like when you're 2 dudes and it's really cold out and you've got no clothes and you're caveman and you're like, I need to stay warm. And it's like, sometimes you just got to snuggle.
In a straight jacket.
In a straight jacket.
Yeah, that's...
We have no clothes, but we have this straight jacket.
We have this straight jacket. Yeah, what kind of premise do you have to get into for that to show up? That's going to be a good plot for a movie.
I think it's like Without a Paddle 3 or something like that.
As is the course for this show.
Yes, exactly. Man, so Friday, you know, it's one day closer to the weekend. Are you looking forward to the weekend, or is there just more work for you, Ryder?
It is more work, but it's the work I want to do, so it's good. Yeah. I want to build a window this weekend out of cherry wood. So I picked up the lumber and I'm trying to get it refined so that I can start making a window.
Well, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ryder Richards' country album.
Yeehaw.
I'm making me a window out of cherry wood.
You make a better door than a window. I think,
Every time there's a window, Jesus gets their wings. I think
Is that?
Yeah, I think that's the phrase.
Yeah, I don't really know if that's it, but
it's not.
We'll look it up later.
Okay, we'll look that one up.
Maybe we can ask our guest.
Maybe he'll know. Who knows? So yesterday, Ryder, we were talking about uploading your brain. I mean, yesterday seemed like so long ago. It took me a second to rewind.
Yeah.
It was like, we were talking about uploading your brain to the matrix, if you will, and the whole concept of digital notes. And we had a guest. His name was also Eric. We got back-to-back Erics this week, which is nice. One spelled it with a C, one spelled it with a K. You let us know at home who spelled it correctly, because there's only one correct way to spell it. I will say Eric with the K sounds a little bit more like a Viking, so
I'm one of those guys that's going to go, I like it with a C and a K.
Oh, I've seen that too.
Yeah,
I've seen
there
that
you
too.
go.
And then sometimes it's like, you've got someone like Eric, and then they're like, I think I'm going to have a kid, and then they name him Eric's son. And then you're like, how many Erics can we get in here? I know, right?
Yeah.
But yesterday we had a guest with us. We were talking about digital note-taking platforms and how that can change your life, honestly, and how it can change the way you think and change the way you process things, and can enable you to become more in touch with yourself. It can help you with your managing your emotions, your relationships, your jobs. It can help you plan your future. It can literally help you accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it can also help with productivity at work. It can help with productivity in your hobbies. It can help you keep notes. It can help you journal. Like, there's just so many things that these systems are good for. And of course, they're stemming from, physical systems. And so these physical systems are now being turned into digital things. You can carry them in your pocket. So it's kind of lovely. I've been using them for about a year now. Prior to that, I was completely anti. I was like, no, I will write everything down. And then I find that there's some problems with writing everything down, such as remembering where you wrote it and having to go back and sift through all those pages to read it again.
Yes, and we have gotten a little bit better about that in the sense of we now have some more technology that can do something called optical character recognition, OCR. So you could take a picture of a written page and it'll figure out what all the characters are for you and turn it into digital text. Now, it's still definitely not perfect, but you can even take advantage of that technology by doing something as simple as opening a Google Doc and pasting an image in there. And I believe that you could get some processing that way. And of course, there are other tools that do that more specifically as well. But I wanted to mention that because Danielle, she's a writer, and she has stacks and stacks of journals that she's written over the years, and I've been pushing her for a while now, like, okay, like, I know you like the written thing, but maybe move over to this digital side where we can search it, where you can copy it, you can paste it, you can move it into other places, you can all these types of things. And so we started to look a little bit into that ourselves, and she still does a mix of both now. So she still has times where there's value in sitting down and writing with no distractions. She's just sitting there with her pen and her journal, and then, not having to be plugged in or anything like that. So there's benefits to that, and seeing the nice, pretty lines and all of that kind of fun stuff. But then she also is using digital note-taking software as well. So sometimes it's kind of a combination of both. Mm-hmm. So that was yesterday for you. But you know what? We are going to have an amazing episode today. So let's go ahead and jump over to our intro. Helpful for life. And welcome back to What the Hell is Water? I'm Reed Garcia.
Ryder Richards. I am wearing a shirt from Roswell, New Mexico.
All right, represent, believe,
hometown,
and the aliens.
Yeah,
because they happened.
Aliens.
What ROI?
I don't know if that's what it says. That would be return on investment. I wonder if they're getting one off of all this alien stuff.
Maybe it's one of those S's that's just like so very barely narrowly, Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yep. That's it. It's a
the aliens were sucking
really
up the normal S's, and so that's kind of
everything
like,
is getting elongated and stretched upward into the ray of doom.
The ray
I don't know.
It could be great.
It could be the ray of enlightenment. Who knows?
It's like, why is everyone so afraid of getting in? Like, if this thing is a spaceship,
why are you afraid?
Like, okay, let's be real. when we ask someone, what are you afraid of when it comes to a UFO taking you? What percentage of people do you think will say probing my butthole?
Depends on where you're asking. Where I grew up, a lot of people.
That's good. So today, I'm sure he'll love that we're transitioning from that straight over to him.
Butthole probing to Eric.
Yes. Talking about boundaries. Wow, what a suiting thing. So,
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about boundaries, but before we talk about today, I want to make sure to highlight some of the things that we talked about a couple of the other times that Eric came here. So when Eric was with us in the past, on episode 38 was when he first came, and he had an introduction to him. We got his background. He told us about his business and why he started it and things like that. But then, and for reference, his business is called Altered Marriage, and it's all about helping people have more successful relationships. And so as a guy who's done marriage counseling for decades now, on the past, we've also pointed out how you and him are both old and I'm the young spry one. So,
important information right there, everybody.
Important. But we also talked about how age and time is different than experience, right? And we talked about that, through the lens of relationships, but also through the lens of expertise and things like that. Mm-hmm. So when in that episode, one of the fun things he mentioned, because I was looking at it yesterday, was he said, so whenever this begins to grow, he's talking about his business, whatever it looks like, I've been doing this for decades, just nobody knew. Nobody knew I was in Steve's garage at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday. And that was when we were talking a little bit about the value of community and how important that is to have a good relationship. And so let's say, you and I have a relationship, and it's good for us to talk with other people and have other people around us that can help support us, that can help call us on our stuff. And so that's the story he was referencing then, was his buddy Steve needed somebody to come be like, bro, wake up, shake out of it. Like, you're messing up right now, and you need to take some personal responsibility in order to make this relationship work. And so that was, a little bit of an exposure to Eric and the three pillars he teaches on, which are community, personal responsibility, and intentionality. And so we talked a little bit about all of those in episode 38. But I also really loved how closely his three pillars tie in with what we're trying to do with Helpful for Life, and also with What the Hell is Water, because we're trying to build a community of people in the world who are intentional about improving their lives. And one of the easiest ways for them to do that is through this show. Every morning you put this on, you're intentional about putting it on, and then you just have to listen, and you just got to take in some information, and then we give you one small challenge every day for you to be able to take that step to improve whatever it is you're working on. So, and then of course, as part of that too, we want to help people take the personal responsibility to recognize what their own issues are and what they're bringing to other relationships in their lives, and how they can become better overall, right? So that was largely episode 38, and we talked about a whole bunch more in there. I'm not going to give the full rundown, but also things like checking yourself at the door and stuff like that. And another good quote from Eric was, feedback always feels better when you ask for it than when you're given it. And so that was saying, like, hey, if I come up to Ryder on Wednesday and he's just got home after a long day of work, and I'm like, stop doing that thing, you stupid dum-dum head. Like, he's not going to be as receptive as to...
I might start laughing, though.
Yeah.
I don't get called a dum-dum head very often.
They do. They're pretty good suckers. But versus maybe you have some sort of standard time where you and your whoever you're having this relationship with, you guys have that time where you talk regularly, and you have that, and then maybe you, Ryder, go and say, hey, I know I've been working on my tone lately, because there was an amazing What the Hell is Water episode about tone. How have I been doing this week? I've been trying to sound a little more caring towards you. And have I been doing that, or is that not? And by going to the partner and coming to them that, it's a lot more powerful than just letting them come to you. So then we had Eric on in episode 51, and that's when we talked about personal responsibility. And the title of that one was Personal Responsibility with Eric Wooten. If you don't like it, blame him. So, I'm sticking behind that one. But the reality of that is that episode was jam-packed with so much. And actually, we joked about holding him hostage because we were like, but wait, no, tell us more.
Yeah.
Give us more knowledge. And we were like, turned him upside down and kind of shook him out. Saw what else he had dangling out there.
Yeah, the things you can do digitally. It's great.
Exactly. But in that, he talked about, he's like, okay, I can't verify this stat, but, upwards of 70% or more of marriages are ending because of not because of a relational issue, but because of a personal issue. I've buggered that one a little bit, so let me say again, upward of 70% or more of marriages that are ending is not a relational issue, it's a personal issue. And that is recognizing like, hey, just because y'all are having rough times, well, maybe the problem, it's not you, it's me, that phrase? Well, it's not us. It's you or it's me, right? It's a lot of times I need to deal with my stuff. I need to take my personal responsibility and try and bring my best self to that relationship before doing the thing that we really like to do, especially here in America, which is point fingers at somebody else, right? Pass the buck, pass the blame, and say, hey, you need to change, and then maybe I'll do something, right? So let's talk about a couple of other things in there for sure. But again, we've got to get over to Eric. So the last thing I'll mention from that was we had a listener question in there where we said, what do you do if you get in a situation where you have a people pleaser in a relationship with a narcissist? Because those are two things that kind of go make each other worse. And I talked about it in the terms of destructive interference, which is kind of the opposite of like noise canceling headphones. Instead of canceling the noise, it makes it louder and louder. And Eric, he said it something like, oh, your problems fit really well together, which could be bad. So you hear a little bit more about that in that episode. And then also we had a bachelorette party that was going on with one of our friends, and we said, hey, what advice would you give to a 20-something, 30-something who's getting married and are doing their bachelorette party? And he answered that one for us. So a couple of those were listener questions. So I want to remind everyone at home that you can write in. You can comment on whatever platform you're on. We're on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can comment on that platform, or you can write to us at helpfulforlife.com and hit the Contact Us button in the top right, because we want to hear from you. We want to know what are the things that you're struggling with, what are the things that you would like help with, or maybe someone in your life, and we can answer your questions just like we did with these other people. And by doing that, you're not only helping yourself, but you're helping all of the people out there who have similar problems. And guess what? Whether you like it or not, you are relatable. There are a lot of people who have similar issues with you, and maybe your particular mix is unique, but part of that is not. And part of that is going to be over here. Part of that's going to be over there. The thing about 8 billion people, or 7.5, whatever we're at, there's going to be a little bit of similarities.
Yeah, there should be some overlap there. More commonality than not, most likely.
Yes, so that brings us to today. So after we were talking about personal responsibility, we started to go into kind of something that was tied into that. And we were like, whoa, okay, we've held him hostage long enough for one day. We'll have to, get him again in the new year. And that was talking about how the flip side of the coin with personal responsibility is boundaries, because personal responsibility is all about taking ownership of you and yourself and making sure that you're doing what you can, right? But a very important thing that Eric has told us in previous episodes is you can't control another person. And the earlier that you understand that, especially if you're in a relationship, the better it's going to be. Because if you're sitting there...
You can with the right straitjacket.
Or the alien control.
Yeah, the probing.
The probing, yes. You can always control it with the probing. And yes, so with the probing, but yeah, so personal responsibility, and the flip side of that coin is boundaries. And some of those boundaries may be like, hey, Ryder, when you make a joke in the middle of my sentence, it helps me,
It really disrupts the flow.
It disrupts the flow. And so I'm going to set a boundary right here and say, we're going to move on from that. Yes. Oh, what a great mime. Wow.
Thank you.
So without further ado, we're going to bring on Eric here, and we're going to talk about boundaries. And I want to make sure to emphasize that, yes, Eric is a counselor, and his main focus is dealing with relationships, romantic relationships. However, that does not mean at all that what we're talking about today is exclusive to intimate relationships. We have relationships at work, you have relationships with your family, you have relationship with your friends, and guess what? I think all of us could use some boundaries with some of those people too. I've heard plenty of people in my life I know that I can see. I'm like, hey, it'd probably be good if you did that and that and that. So yeah, so without any more ado, after I already said that once, we will bring over Eric Wooten from Altered Marriage. Good morning. Say that one more time for us.
What's going on, fellas?
What's going on? All
Doing
right.
all right?
Yes.
What's up?
Oh, there's just that initial
What's
delay
going
at the
on? Are
beginning.
you hearing me?
Yeah. It'll get better.
Oh, gotcha.
Right? You know,
Yeah.
Cool.
I've got faith.
I just
First
before
minute or
we go
so-
anywhere, I need to. The first what?
Don't worry.
Nothing. I was just gonna say the first minute on the software, the voices get a little bit jumbled, and then it all catches up, and we'll be fine. So yeah, man, doing good. How about you? You liking this cold weather?
I'm good. I'm good. I do need to clarify, since you guys are talking about probing and me showing up in Steve's garage, that the nature of that visit, what was to talk to him about his marriage. So, and it was his wife and my wife as well. So there was no alien probing,
Okay,
whatever you
We're
guys
good.
got going on.
Thanks for
Just for
clarifying
the
on that
audience, clarify that.
Well, we're so glad you're here with us.
It could have been
Yeah.
such an exciting
That's
story.
a definite
but-
area of boundary.
Yeah. Boundary. Okay, good. Well, hey Eric, did you have a good holidays? Were you able to stay mostly warm and then occasionally cold and then really hot and then cold again?
Yeah, that was basically it. Yeah, today I know Ryder was talking jackets again. Somebody turned the heat off in Texas 2 days ago again, so looking forward to that coming back on. Yeah, I think I did all right. Got
Yeah.
COVID in there a little bit, so that was fun.
As it happens, you know. Or what can you do besides deal with it? And that's kind of what happens in relationships too, huh?
That's a good. I probably should have had a boundary for
Yeah.
COVID, so I didn't get it. But
Well, hey Eric,
didn't.
actually, your delay on our end is pretty bad. So let's just take a quick pause here, and if you could just quit out of your browser and reload and rejoin, and let's see if it gets a little better this time. And we'll play a little bit of music for our guests here. We'll be right back.
cool.
Oh, maybe we were already live and I didn't press the
Hi.
button right. Who
Oh,
knows?
well.
All right, Eric, let's try again.
All right, is that any better?
Oh, much
Oh,
better. Night and
perfect.
day.
There we look at that.
Yes. So, okay. So you were just telling us how you and your friend were probing in the garage years and years ago. That's what you wanted to say, right? And it was cold. And then
I
it
was
was
actually
hot.
what I was telling you was that I'm Eric with a C, and I think that was Eric with a K.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
that was okay.
Yeah.
Nice. I like it. Well, let's, without further ado, let's jump into the topic at hand here, Eric, because I know when it comes to boundaries, there's a ton of stuff to talk about. And actually, we have, if we haven't already, we'll be posting in the chat in our a playlist of all the videos you have on your channel about boundaries, because
Oh, okay.
I know you already have a handful of them out there. And also I want to point out, we were going through the recaps of a couple of previous episodes you have. We have a playlist in the description already that shows people who want to see the previous episodes you're on. They can go see that, and that'll always be updated when he continues to come on. So when it comes to boundaries, I know we could talk about all sorts of things and get into all sorts of rabbit holes. Is there any kind of focus that you think we should have for today, or should we just kind of start and then put up the guardrails as we go?
Yeah, I think we just start and go.
Sounds good. Well, when it comes to boundaries, what do we need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and obviously a million books have been written on boundaries, so I'm not the expert here, but boundary is simply the way you determine in any relationship who owns what, right? So it likens itself to a fence between you and the neighbors, right? There's a fence. If you have a home, you got a fence, and that fence determines the stuff on your side of the fence is yours. your responsibility, and the stuff on the other side of the fence is somebody else's responsibility. And so the same thing happens in relationships. To be healthy, we need to have clear boundaries of what I'm responsible for and what you're responsible for. And most of the time, when things go sideways, it's somebody not taking responsibility for what they should be owning, or somebody else. You see this a lot with parents, right? Parents taking responsibility for something that is their kid's responsibility. And if their kid doesn't want to, and you got a helicopter parent, they're going to swoop in and take responsibility for little Johnny's fill in the blank. And, relationships get lopsided. So whether it's parents and kids, whether it's you with family and in-laws, whether it's a romantic relationship, boundaries are key to a healthy relationship, frankly.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've talked about many times on this show is that we as adults like to think we're elevated, we're so much better than those young little halflings that we have running around, and we know all of the things, and we don't need to do things like that, and all those things we did when we were a kid, we don't need to do those anymore because we're better. But yet the reality is we're not. We're still humans, and we're still children. Just children have their hearts a little bit more on their sleeve, which you could argue actually could help things a lot of times because you don't have to interpret what that person is thinking or feeling. But the point being with that is that a lot of the things that you do with a child or a pet even is about setting those boundaries and saying like, hey, this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do, and being overtly clear about it. And oftentimes using rewards, using positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement or punishment, using these methods to help drive that point home. And those things don't really go as well, or at least as often, into adult life. And maybe they should. Maybe we could benefit from that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you two should punish one another when something doesn't go right.
I was just thinking about that. I was like, who likes to be punished? And then I was like, let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
Onlyfans.com/helpful for life. After hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. You did say, Reed, should we just go anywhere, or should we kind of have guidelines? So I think
there's one of those guardrails.
We should stay away from S&M and some of those punishment boundaries today.
Next time.
Yeah. Leave that to the aliens. So
yeah. So okay. So we've talked about boundaries, and we use this idea of a fence. And there's a phrase where good fences make good neighbors, and it's like, hey, if you have this land, I put this fence here not to necessarily like keep you out or do anything else. It's just like, hey, this is where my land stops and this is where your land is, and I want to keep your sheep from wandering into my pasture and things like that. And yeah, you can still come over, but you got to use the gate, or you can hop the fence, but only once a week.
Yeah, there's, I think, like an old Robert Frost poem or something where they're talking about this, but the maintenance of the fence is really the interesting aspect of that. Like, of course, there's boundaries everywhere, but it is in the two neighbors working together to maintain the fence that's, I think, actually the kind of rich space to get into there. Because I think one of the things is, of course, if one person doesn't care and they kept letting the fence fall down on their side, and then you have to go over and fix their boundary, like, then all of a sudden the boundary thing doesn't seem to be working anymore. Or one person gets resentful of the other person for having to maintain even that one modicum of space. So I'm kind of interested in this sort of breaching of these boundaries in those kind of ideas.
Yeah, I think, in a romantic relationship, right, that's going to get real frustrating if there's an agreed upon boundary of who owns what, and you're not owning your part, so I continually have to exact the consequences that come with this boundary because you're not willing to do your part. That's going to make maintaining the relationship in a healthy way tough. So, for instance, we'll just give an example. So let's say, I don't want to stereotype, man. Let's say the husband has anger issues, and he often comes home from work and lets it out on the family. So you got mom and some kids sitting at home on eggshells wondering when dad gets home, is he going to be mad? Or you got dad that drinks, is dad going to be drunk when he gets home? And so the mom may set a boundary that says, we're not responsible for you owning your behavior and your attitude, right? So here's the boundary. If you come home and you're yelling at us, I'm simply going to grab the kids and go to my mom's for a couple hours. Or You come home drunk, I'm going to grab the kids and go stay with my friend Susie for the night. And there's the boundary, right? The consequence is not meant as like some punitive thing, but there's got to be something, so that I think that's a tough area where sometimes people are like, well, I'm setting boundaries, and all their boundaries are like these punitive measures. If you even blank, then I'm going to nail you here. That's not the point, right? The consequence is just to show this isn't important. And so the next time the husband comes home yelling and frustrated, mom grabs the kids calmly, jumps in the car, and leaves, right? And so that's a boundary that's been set to help somebody take ownership for their behavior. Whether they do take ownership or not, again, we can't control, but we can control what we've decided to do if they don't, right? And so the hope would be at some point the dad would value enough the fact that his behavior is negatively impacting the rest of the family that he would change it, right? He would figure out how to adjust and not come home and do those things. But there's no guarantee of that. And that's where, going back to your side, he's not keeping up his side of the fence. That's going to be frustrating because as a mom, I'm tired of having to leave 3 times a week when you get home. Like at some point, the mom's probably going to decide, I'm probably just going to leave and not come back. Right. I'm not going to. So to your analogy, I'm going to go ahead and sell my house. I'm going to move to a different neighborhood because said neighbor never takes care of his fence. And I'm tired of being the one to take care of the fence. Right. So that, that's I guess the fallout of one not taking care of their side is at some point there'll probably be another boundary set that is even more severe. And, that's what you have to do. I think with any relationship, you set a boundary, you clearly communicate what the consequence is in this area. And if the person doesn't do it, you follow through. And if it's a continual thing, then you probably set a new boundary.
So
right?
there's a lot of really good stuff in there.
I changed the locks on the door, right? So you can't even come in.
So let me unpack a couple of things there. So first off, one thing that I think is really important is the fact that you're pointing out that, hey, the consequence is not meant to be punitive. And correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, but by punitive, you mean like you don't want it to be, it's not meant to be some big punishment, some big harsh thing like, oh, you bad, me good, anything like that. It's just meant to be like, hey, if you do A, then B is going to happen. And that's just how it's going to be. And the reason that is good is because one of the things you like to do is instead of it being me versus you, it's us versus the problem, right? Us versus that fence. Yeah. We're trying to make that fence better together. And so if you say, look, I'm not the one who's saying that, this is bad, you're doing a bad job, I'm punishing you by doing these things. I am saying like, hey, here's a boundary I'm going to set. And, if you want us relationship to work, this is something that is very important and I think is good for our success and the value of our relationship. And so by setting that boundary, you're enabling that relationship to grow and to thrive. And so by doing the sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, I did too. No, but by setting the boundary, you're talking about setting them, and I guess maintaining them as a way to avoid the punitive. There's something interesting about punitive, and Eric, I'm kind of fascinated by that as well. Like when it's punitive and when it is just sort of an action that I think potentially as a way to like maybe help or save the marriage. Like how can you, or the relationship, whatever it is, like. How do you parse those out?
Yeah, so let me get this thought out since I remembered it and it's related. So we're talking about starting out where and starting out with smaller ones too, and they can then amplify and grow and grow and grow, and if they need to, and that can also be a sign and part of that conversation is like, hey, look, we started out with we just needed a little line on the ground, right? And that's what we needed, and that wasn't working for us. So then we had to build a one stick fence, and then now we've got a freaking brick wall, and you're still managing to bash that thing down. So what does that say like about us, and what does that say about you? And so that can be part of the discussion as well, as like, look, here you can see over the last months, years, or whatever, here are all the times that we've tried to set boundaries and you've not respected them. So how do you expect me to come to this relationship and say, yes, this is good for me, this is good for us, I think it's worth us still doing this when you've been walking all over us, destroying all of the fences we've been trying to build, And then maybe that person needs to take some personal responsibility and saying that, hey, until you take that personal responsibility, we can't move this relationship forward. And until you respect these boundaries, we cannot have a relationship. And sometimes that means you no longer have a relationship with that person. And one of the things that I wanted to point out to our listeners at home is I encourage you to start early and start small, because what happens so often is these problems, like they start small and then they build and they build and they build. We talk about preventive maintenance all the time on here. And then next thing you know, your oil runs out in your car and your engine completely fails. And you're like, what happened? Oh, I guess I should go to the mechanic. It's like, no, now it's a little too late. And now it's going to be too hard to repair. So I'll let you respond to that one, Eric. Sorry to...
Yeah, no, that's good. I want to just, I think we should include in the show notes, Ryder Reed refers to our age often, but it was him forgetting his train of thought. So we can just include that in the show notes for next time.
Check.
Clip that.
The young, spry mind is also failing.
Right.
Yeah,
so no, Ryder, you were saying, when is it punitive versus constant? I mean, part of it's just heart, right? What my heart for the boundary is a healthy relationship, not a let me figure out how to be vindictive and get you, at every corner. So, I mean, at the end of the day, that's even with kids, right? I mean, you hopefully have some rules, and then there's consequences when kids break the rules. Hopefully, it's tough as a parent to completely take emotion out of there, but hopefully it's a pretty neutral thing, not a vindictive, like, well, I can't believe you lied to me as your parent, so I'm going to nail you, I'm going to give you 2 months grounded because you told me one lie. And it's like, that might be a little punitive kind of thing. So
yeah,
it's
Mom,
just like
that was
right?
way too punitive. Why did you do that?
Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've yet to have a cop pull me over for speeding and come up to the window just berating me so beside themselves that I would ever think about speeding on the road that they monitor. They usually just come up and say, do you know how fast you're going? You were speeding. Here's your consequence, right? I mean, generally there's not this emotional, I'm going to get you for, disobeying. So I think that's the same heart behind a boundary is, this is for the good of the relationship, not for me to figure out ways to hurt and punish you.
Yeah. So one of the other things I wanted to bring up was a TV show that I've watched recently, and it's called Made. Have you ever seen that one before, Eric?
I have not watched it, but I'm familiar with it. Yes.
Okay. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because it, I think, is a good show to watch to see maybe some boundaries that are either need to be set or have been set and are not working, and how those relationships can develop between romantic people, between when you're both parents of a child, and then also dealing with your parents as an adult. And so that show goes into all of those things. And the reason I bring it up is because don't underestimate the power of media to help you learn and understand and see how people can work and how emotions can work and how relationships can play out. And yes, it's good for us to have conversations like this and for people to hear us all talking about it, but sometimes seeing it played out and being able to see and relate a little bit to it can really help you actually take it in and understand it and be like, oh, okay, I get what that might be like a little bit more. It can help you become a little bit more empathetic. And then also as you're watching, you might be like, hey, that makes me think of X, or that makes me think of this person, or, oh, maybe I need to think about that. And so I encourage you guys at home to start thinking those things as you're watching some of these shows, especially if you're trying to improve yourself, right? So I just wanted to mention that show in there real quick. So Eric, we had a question in our chat from Justin. He says, what about boundaries with your parents? So how do you deal with that one? So, is it different? Is it the same as a romantic relationship? There's that phrase where blood is thicker than water, which a lot of people don't know. The rest of that phrase actually says the exact opposite of the way people use that phrase, where it's like, I don't remember the whole phrase now, but
no, I don't. I don't either. But yeah, people use that quite a bit. And
who came up with that phrase? They should do a show on that.
Yeah,
etymology of phrases we use, right?
I like that.
Yeah. And you know what? There is something kind of difficult because you can also get bullied by these phrases or these boundaries, right? Or what you should do or should not do, right? And that's I think that's one of the things sometimes where you have to realize that you're getting bullied, and then you have to set up these boundaries. But that can happen as well in the home life, and I'm assuming that's kind of where this direction is going with the parents. Like, how do you set up boundaries with your parents, because they're still trying to look out for you, but at the same time you've got to grow up. It is, helicopter parents being one thing, maybe abusive parents being something else. But
yeah, and there's also, kind of two stages, right? I'm sure there's more, but for our purposes, there's when you're still in the home and they're still very much performing that parent role for you, and then there's afterwards when you become an adult, quote unquote, and then that relationship often shifts and goes a little bit more, I don't know, friend, maybe too strong of a word, but less of that coaching and direct punishment. Like, I mean, if your parents are putting you in timeout when you're 35, like that may not be the average thing, but maybe it's still happening.
That might be.
But yeah, so there's two kind of angles there, Eric, both before like you're kind of being raised and then after you're raised. So how do you handle relationships or boundaries?
Yeah,
with your parents?
I think it's tough when you're in your parents' home to be the one to set boundaries, right? I mean, do you get to say, "Hey, I'm setting a boundary. You guys don't get to come in my room," and it'd be like, "I own your room, right? You need to abide by my rules." So let's
you go up to mom and say, "Hey, look, Sharon, we need to talk."
Yeah, right. I'm gonna go ahead and come in your master bedroom whenever I want. I don't need to knock because I'm just setting that boundary. So let's assume the kid is grown and out of the house, right? I think the boundaries then become, setting a boundary to how you want the relationship to look like. Like, Ryder, you mentioned an abusive parent. So let's go that route. You've got a, mom who wants to talk daily or every time you get on the phone with her, she's critical of you or she puts you down, or maybe she's abusive. She cusses, that kind of stuff. That's not healthy, right? So a healthy boundary would be to, when you think about boundaries, you establish the boundary, you clearly communicate the boundary to the other person with the consequence that'll come with it, and then you follow through, right? That's the pattern. And then if that's not working, you set a new boundary and do the same thing. So in that case, it may be, "Hey, mom, love talking to you, but every time we talk, you're negative, or you always talk about dad or my sibling, or you're critical of me. You always putting me down on what I'm doing. And I love you, but I'm not interested in having those conversations because they ruin my day. So when we talk, if you start down that road, if you cuss at me, if you're critical of me, I'm going to go ahead and politely end the conversation and we can talk another time." There's my boundary. Next time I get on the phone, mom starts getting critical or whatever, I say, "Mom, you're doing what we mentioned before, and I'm not interested in continuing the conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and hang up, and maybe I'll talk to you tomorrow." End the conversation. And hopefully over time, mom will correct the behavior. But if she doesn't, the next boundary would probably be, "I'm not going to answer the phone. I don't need to answer the phone every time you call because you're calling too much and the conversations are always negative. So now I'm picking and choosing when I'm going to go ahead and, answer the phone and engage in that conversation." So that might be an example of how to set a boundary with a parent.
Yeah, so it made me think, and again, you have multiple videos on boundaries, so I may have grabbed the wrong one here, but one of the ones I've watched was called 3 Levels of Boundaries: How to Protect Your Relationship by Setting Boundaries for Others. And I believe in that one, and I don't expect you to know exactly which one's which either, right? But in one of these videos,
I remember everything I ever do completely. So yeah, 8 years ago, I'm like a vault. Remember that video you did 8 years ago? Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. The steel trap.
Got it.
Right.
But yeah, so in that video or one of your videos, you talk about, say, hey, and don't expect that, especially if this is the first boundary you're setting in a relationship, don't go ahead and set like, I set our boundary, like they're going to respect it. They're never going to cross it. It's going to be perfect. Like, set your expectations that it's going to happen. And that's a very important thing for you to know, and set that consequence to be something that you are okay executing on, right? Like, so don't go for something like, hey, mom, if you talk to me like that, then we're never going to talk again, right? Like, maybe that's not the first boundary you should try setting, because you're almost setting yourself up for failure in some ways. And that's, again, why we were talking earlier, like, hey, set those boundaries early and set them small so you can kind of allow that space for them to grow a little bit and expect them to be pushed a little bit to swell. But then you got to hold fast, right?
Sure. And like there's some people that have never had a boundary set for them, right? So yeah, they're not going to be like, "Oh, you set a limit on my behavior? Thank you." You know, I mean,
And I
some
would actually
people are
argue
going to
probably most people have not had a boundary set for them.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think probably if we sat here and talked about you guys' upbringing and that stuff, I mean, if you had, some parents that were semi-present, you probably had a boundary. If you were in school, you probably had some boundaries. But no, there are some people that just do not accept boundaries, right? They're going to push every limit. And so, yeah, I think in the video that you're talking about, the 3 levels, part of the reason I did that one is because a lot of people who are non-confrontational have a hard time. That's a tough conversation to say, Mom, I don't appreciate the behavior. If you do it, this is the consequence, right? Some people, that's like, I can't do that to my mom. And so in that video, I talk about the levels being like, start with unspoken. Don't even tell her. Just choose not to answer the phone sometimes. That's a boundary, right? And you can get back later and say, hey, sorry, I couldn't answer the phone. I was busy, right? So you set a boundary. They don't even really know it's a boundary. You're just starting yourself. And then the next level was set a boundary, but the focus is you. So maybe, hey, mom, me and my new spouse are trying to put our phones down from 7 to 9 p.m. every evening so we can work on the relationship and prioritize each other. Really, you don't want to answer your mom's call, but the boundary is focused on we're setting something for us to help us. And so it's not as offensive to you because it's not about you. We're not answering the phone call for anybody when really it's only mom that calls anyway. So those are 2 levels to kind of try out before you get to the more confrontational. This is about you. Like, we need to do something.
Yeah, and recognizing that whoever that person is that you're setting boundaries with is going to receive it differently based on who they are, what their issues are, and what their history is, and how many boundaries they've had set for them in the past. And maybe they're a people pleaser, maybe maybe they have all of these dispositions that make them respond a different way. So it's worth knowing that ahead of time before you go into it. Like, hey, like if you're setting that boundary with your mom, that conversation may be a little different than one with your dad or your brother or your kid or your cousin or your in-laws.
Yeah, the parent one is very tricky, and we don't need to keep talking too much maybe about just the parental side of these boundaries and relationships, but one of the things is I don't want to be the kind of person who doesn't have a good relationship with my parents, right? Or something like that. Because I think there's also society frowns on the idea that you could somehow become estranged from your parents or put your foot down and not deal with them anymore. It's like, well, didn't they raise you? And there becomes this kind of backlog of values that are attributed to your parents and how you should treat your parents. And so I think that's one of the things with these kind of coming to these difficult decisions about them is hard. It's also weird that sometimes the kid ends up having to be the parent in the relationship, and that's a reversal that is hard to get to and takes a lot of time to sort of start, I don't know, manifesting and holding on to. Also, when the parent gets older and they start acting more and more like the child, that reversal and throughout all of history has been kind of fascinating to watch.
Yeah, certainly. All those are difficult dynamics in setting them. But at the end of the day, this is about ownership and what kind of relationship. I mean, even with the parents, you're expressing a desire for a great relationship, but if they're not owning their behavior, you have to decide. Do I want to just let them do what they're going to do on behalf of saving the relationship, or am I willing to set some consequences in place to have the peace and the kind of relationships that I want to have? So yeah, I mean, it's not, we're talking pretty logistically and frankly about it, but obviously that when you got emotion and relationship and everything else involved, it's much more complicated than just, hey, here it is, there we go, that was easy.
Yeah. So okay, so we talked a little bit about maybe what it's like setting a boundary with someone in your family, but What about if it's something like a job or work where it's like, hey, look, they're paying me, and I mean, it's my boss. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, they're doing this thing all the time. They're walking all over me. Like, how can I set a boundary with someone where maybe I don't have that much power, quote unquote, to have a consequence, or maybe I need to get creative about consequences? What would you say about that?
Yeah, the tough part is, what are you willing to lose, right? What
Yeah.
what are you willing to cut? Because if you're not willing to lose that job, then you're not able to set a healthy boundary.
Yep.
I and
Because the boundary
I
has to
agree with that
be,
to an extent, but I want to push back because I think the default a lot of people have is the fear of losing their job, and they're like, I don't want to lose this job, therefore I'm going to let this person walk all over me, and they let that start from the beginning. It's like, okay, I'm here, I'm new, I want to make everyone happy, I want to make them like me, I want to make sure I get a good spot in this job, and then those boundaries are not set at the beginning, right? So for me, my advice to people is from the beginning, start with those boundaries. Like if you start taking those emails every day after work and you start working overtime all the time from the beginning, like you are letting them know, you're signaling like, hey, here's my fence is, I actually don't have a fence, so come on in. So some of it might, in my opinion, might be starting early, but yeah, so I want to make sure to point out, like, you can have some boundaries. It doesn't, so don't, especially for the type of person who you're like, yeah, this is why I don't ever say anything. So, but anyways, continue.
yeah,
Eric, you
yeah,
you
and
can disagree with me.
that's a thin line too, right? Because if you come into a new job with all kinds of boundaries, they're going to be like, bro, who are you? So so I think it may be good at the beginning to try to set boundaries by asking questions.
In
Back
the
to your
interview
email
even as
thing.
well.
Yeah, there's a bunch of emails, and so you may ask a question of your boss. Hey, is this kind of standard where when I go home I would have to continue working and answering emails, or am I able, I mean, you can kind of express the boundary that you want by asking the question, as opposed to telling them what you are and aren't going to do. But yeah, no, I think it's the same thing. But how you're treated, how many hours you're willing to work based on the commitment you made in the interview process and some of that kind of stuff. But again, at the end of the day, when you set a boundary, you have to be willing to follow through and deal with whatever that consequence is. So if you tell a boss, I'm not going to respond if you treat me that way, that may mean you lose your job. But where do you want to set the boundaries, and what do you want to allow people to do, and how they impact your life, and all those kind of things. So yeah, again, I think you can try to set your own boundaries first without talking about it. Like we talked about, just don't do the emails. And then when they call you on it, be like, oh, I thought we didn't need to do that in the evening. Is this something new? And then, well, maybe I can do it every once in a while, but I'm not going to do it every day. And begin to set those wherever you need to be. So, I mean, I think it's the principle behind it's universal, whether it's parent to kid, kid to parent, romantic relationship, work, friendships. It's really saying, wherever we're talking about behaviors, this is where my boundary is.
Yeah. Well, another thought I had as we were talking about that is, you know, sometimes it's like, hey, I may be willing to do that thing that might be extra time, effort, whatever on my part, whether that's for a spouse or for a job or whatnot. But what am I getting out of it? Like, what is the benefit I'm going to get? Because if it's like, all right, you're telling me I need to answer all those emails and I need to come in every weekend, like, am I going to be compensated? Am I going to get extra overtime? Am I going to, is this going to help me line myself up for this promotion? Like, is there some benefit I'm going to get from that other than you just get to keep your job or you just get to keep that relationship? I mean, that can be part of it too.
Yeah, I really do like, Eric, when you're talking about like figuring out what you want, right? That there's something interesting about, like, if you want that money from that job and that's more important to you than, sort of following through on the rest of it. You got to figure that out at some point, because otherwise we can sort of enact all these miniature battles all day. But if we don't know what our priorities are, you can just be shooting yourself in the foot.
But I also want to
Yeah.
point out that this, go ahead. Sorry, Eric.
I was going to say same thing with the romantic relationship. We go back to the consequence for the angry husband. If a wife is not willing to lose the relationship, she's never going to set the boundary. And if, not being alone or whatever it means for that relationship to end is, too vital to her, she's never going to set and keep a same thing with parents. If I'm worried about, my parents being mad at me, I'm not going to set the boundaries. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you gotta be pretty clear on your core values and what type of life and relationships you want. Otherwise, you'll never follow through on the boundaries you try to set, and that's a whole nother issue, right? That you keep setting boundaries that you allow them to break through. At some point, they're like, your boundary means nothing anyway. You never follow through.
Right.
Yeah, that consistency, and you were talking earlier, Reed, about the sort of almost the conditioning, right? The operative conditioning or Pavlovian, whatever you want to call it, but that consistency is very important for those things, not to confuse people. So it's one of those things where, yeah, if you're going to set it, then you actually have to have the guts to follow through, and that's a whole different conversation. Maybe
Right.
that's one that we have next time, is like how you, because I do like your the steps, Eric, of like you making a decision for yourself and maybe not having to do the confrontation thing if you're not good with confrontation. Then over time, building and building until you get more and more comfortable so you can have those conversations.
Yeah, and I want to point out from episode 38 that we had another quote from you where you said, some people get married because this person fills something that is missing in them. But that's dangerous because whatever the reason we get married for, if that ceases to exist, we'll want to get out of the marriage. And so that's when you were talking just now about that theoretical woman who's not going to set the boundary because she's so fearful of losing the relationship, of losing the value in the things, and especially if the kids get involved and again get messier and stuff like that. And it's like, hey, I'm afraid and I don't want to lose these parts of my life, but this part needs to change. And that's where my biggest message to people is, that's why you start small and you start adding those boundaries early, so it's much easier for you, and you don't make yourself have to make that tough decision way down the line. Like, start making a bunch of the easier, smaller decisions right now. And it could be something small like, hey, when we eat dinner, like, I want you to use a napkin. And if you don't use a napkin, then you don't get a plate, whatever. Like, it can be something like almost like small, but as a way for people to kind of practice that muscle, if you will. It's like, oh, hey, if you show up late, like, that's important for you to be on time, because, you got to pick up the kid, and we can't have the teacher sit there for 2 hours while they're waiting for you to show up. So if you stop doing that, then you're not going to be able to go pick up the kid anymore, or whatever that thing might be. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, that's why I say, if you really start thinking about it, we all had boundaries, right? Whether it was, you don't get to leave the table until you finish your plate, or, if you don't finish your plate, you don't get any dessert later before bedtime. And so there's always been some boundaries for us with our behaviors and what we do. So yeah, I mean, and going back to previous episode, right? That's why personal responsibility is so important. If I come into a relationship and I'm not healthy, it now becomes hard for me to set the boundary and hold boundaries and, not take ownership for it, and that's why people get codependency and all kinds of other stuff, where it's like, now I'm not only taking responsibility for my side of the fence, but I'm going over the neighbor's fence and making sure their fence is good and their yard's clean. And, well, I don't want my neighbor to come out of their backyard and step on their own dog's poop. So let me climb over the fence and scoop up their stuff for them so that they don't run into that, and that's where you get all kinds of unhealthy behaviors in relationships. So it does come back to what we talked about last time. I need to be healthy if I'm going to be able to set healthy boundaries. And when I'm not, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, and since you mentioned codependency, I want to make sure for people at home, so codependency means that there's independence, right? So me and Ryder, we're independent people. We do not depend on each other. Then there's dependent, right? Which is like, I cannot function, I cannot live, I cannot do anything without Ryder, which, I mean, who can? And then there's codependent, right? Which is where we are depending on each other, but sometimes too far, too much. And so if that's something that could be a problem, let me rephrase that. That is something that can be a problem in a lot of relationships. And if it's something you're aware of, there's something called Codependence Anonymous that you can check out. So you give that a Google. We'll share that one in the chat as well. Because, and maybe you're like, I don't think I have a problem with that. Well, maybe you should look into it a little bit, especially if you have some relationship issues. That could be something that is an issue for you guys. So last couple of minutes here before we wrap up. Any other thoughts or questions on boundaries there, Ryder?
Oh, yeah, the whole conversation has been good, Eric. I always enjoy like the sort of depth you bring to it. That there's also sort of like a really nice clarity to the way you talk about it with ownership and the fence. I really enjoy those kind of thoughts. That, yeah, we've agreed you will take care of this and I will take care of this, and then there's this kind of trespassing that can happen or not, right? And just sort of watching for that. And then I really also like that idea that you can work your way up to these things. It doesn't have to happen all at once. And yeah, that's good stuff. That's stuff that I think I really need to hang on to.
Yeah, no, that's good. And again, this is, Reed said it at the start, but this is every relationship. This is not just, your romantic relationship. This is parent to kid, kid to parent, peer to peer, friend to friend. I mean, it's not health. Some of us have friendships where we always are there for our friends, but our friends are seemingly never there for us in the toughest moments, right? And you get that lopsided, and oftentimes there needs to be boundaries set in that, right? If you're not there for me the way I'm always there for you, next time you need me, I may not be as readily available. And again, the heart is not punitive. I'm going to get you because I'm still pissed at you. It's, if this is a reciprocal relationship, the last, 3 times I've called on you, you've been too busy, but you consistently call on me and I'm there for you. And this is how that feels, right? This is how your behavior impacts me. And so, if you're not going to be there for me at the same level, I probably need to scale back as well to kind of protect and guard my heart. And then certainly in parenting, I mean, we all screwed up, right? I mean, this morning, my daughter texted me from school, hey, are you available? Because she forgot something. And, a lot of parents, now I don't mind every once in a while if she's forgotten something, run it up there to her. But if that's a regular occurrence, no, you gotta take responsibility for that. Like, you're going to get an F on the paper because you didn't bring your assignment, right? Now, I don't want to do that to my kid every time, but that's where consequences get tough, because some parents are like, well, no, I need my kid to get straight A's, so I can't have, and you protect. I remember having a middle school principal when our oldest kid was in middle school that looked at me and said, not that I was guilty of doing this, but he just said, let your kids fail now, because it doesn't go on their transcripts like it does in high school. Because if you come to the rescue now on every assignment and every project, you're going to be doing it till they graduate. And I was like, that's good advice. So yeah, when you forgot your science project,
No, and
right?
I this hits close to home to me, because this is something that I've had issues with, and I probably could have used a boundary on when I was growing up. We talked about in a previous episode how one of the things I struggle a lot with is being on time. And we talked about in a previous episode how now after I left my high school, they changed their system to where they literally close a gate and everybody has to go through the office and get a slip, and they've got to go to detention the first time. And it's like, and that's everybody. They took the human element out of it, the decision, the feeling sorry for you, all that stuff.
It's
right?
For these, Reed can be really charming and he's slippery like an eel.
Right?
Hey, like an eel.
You wouldn't believe my morning. I mean,
Exactly.
Come on, you can't believe this. Yeah.
Yeah, so that
Look at me,
I really like that.
Spry. Let me in.
I'm agile still.
Start doing weird dance moves for them, just distract them, and then run off.
Yes, man. So I wanted to point out we just added in the chat just now the playlist with all of Eric's videos on boundaries. So if you guys want to learn some more about them, that is a great place to start. And of course, like a good hostage, we're going to bring Eric back every now and then feed him some food and information, and then let him come back some other time in the future. So, but in the last episode, we were talking, episode 38, when we were talking about ownership and personal responsibility, we shared a TED Talk by a guy named Jocko Willink, who is a former Navy SEAL, and it's called Extreme Ownership. So that is, we're talking kind of about boundaries. Well, sometimes in order to help enforce those boundaries, you need to tell that person, like, hey, maybe it's time you take a little bit of personal responsibility yourself. So that is a flip side of the coin, as we've mentioned here, the personal responsibility and those boundaries. So one other thing I wanted to grab from the chat, we have Justin who popped up and said that it's a little harder to read, so sorry about it. But codependency is a circular relationship in which one person needs the other person, who in turn needs to be needed. And so that, as you might guess, can make things a little complicated, and it can be unhealthy and can cause issues. So again, we mentioned Codependency Anonymous is something, or you can do some searching just in general on codependency to see if that's something that can help you guys out. Well, Eric, thank you so much for today, teaching us a little bit about boundaries and how it can affect, your romantic relationship, but also how it can affect relationship with your family, possibly your parents, your kids, siblings, things like that. And also how that it actually is something in every relationship you have. Also your friends, maybe your new job, your boss, and how you can start to set some of those boundaries, and how important it is to have some type of consequence. But that consequence does not need to be punitive. It does not need to be punishing. It does not need to be wag my finger in your face, take you through the streets saying shame. Shame. You don't have to do all of those things for it to be a valuable boundary. And so some of our encouragement was for people to start setting those boundaries early, start them really small, and expect people to break them. Don't go in with the expectations, because as Eric said on a previous episode, you'll never be in control of another person. So if you're going in there with
yes,
that,
I did. I said that. Yes,
yes,
good.
he's a wise man. That's the thing about being so wise.
There's nothing scarier. Yeah, there's nothing scarier than someone say, "Let me play back a quote that you said last time." Because it's like, I may not believe that anymore.
Yeah.
As you grow and mature, that's honestly the scariest thing about like doing shows or a YouTube channel. It's like 5 years from now, I may have a different opinion on a video I shot. I may not even agree with that premise anymore. So yeah, it's a little scary to put stuff out there. You remember you said
for sure. No, and I completely agree. And that is one of the things that is worth acknowledging here, especially on a live show. Like, we're going to make mistakes. Our minds are going to change. We're going to get more information. In the past, we've talked about the scientific process and like, hey, that's the best you've got with what you're doing. You're doing the best with the information you have, rather. And that information is always evolving, right? And so that's something that we are very cognizant of here at Helpful for Life. And eventually we plan to implement where, if not every piece of content, most piece of content, we have essentially a log associated with it that says, hey, we published this, we said this, and then we learned these other things. Now you can go look at these other spots where we've now corrected, we've learned more, and something like that. So keep your eyes peeled for that coming up in the future. But other than that, Eric, any last thoughts before you head out?
No, I think just to that note we just left with, we may find out 5 years down the road that aliens are actually very moral, and then Ryder's going to feel bad about the whole probing thing. So we may have to retract that, right?
Yeah. If aliens actually are angels, and I've been talking about their butts the whole time or something, like, I feel really bad.
Yeah, they're probably gonna. Yeah, you're probably gonna have to retract that. So just keep that in mind.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Eric. And I wanted to make sure to let people know that in addition to the playlist where people can see a little bit more and learn a little bit more about boundaries, I wanted to make sure to let people know that they can go to your website, alteredmarriage.com, which we'll drop in the chat as well. And that's alter, ALTARED, marriage, MARRIAGE. Altered, like getting married at an altar. So you can go to alteredmarriage.com and you can get a free guide to intimacy there. Tell us a little bit about that, Eric.
Yeah, it just covers 4 areas of intimacy: emotional, recreational, physical, and spiritual. And so it's just some idea, hey, if we're kind of disconnected in our relationship, what are some practical things we can do? So it just kind of takes you through and allows you to create a schedule and say, hey, here's how we're going to work on these different areas of intimacy to feel a little more connected in a relationship. Pretty simple.
Yeah, and then also as part of Altered Marriage, community is very important to you guys, and I believe that you have a community that people can get plugged into where they can take that step and make their marriage stronger. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I do a number of things from classes to counseling to retreats, but we have a marriage membership. It's got a monthly fee, and so you get access to videos and worksheets to kind of self work on your relationship. But then we also have a community where couples can connect with each other, and so we do things like challenges. We do a monthly live Zoom Q&A, and so just trying to create a community of couples. We've got spaces for husbands and wives in there where they can kind of chat with each other and ask questions and encourage each other. And so just trying to create an online community of couples who obviously one of my pillars is community. So I believe in the power of having other couples who are also trying to strengthen their relationships and being able to kind of learn from each other. So that's what that's all about.
So we'll drop those links in the chat, but alteredmarriage.com. And on YouTube, you can find him. His channel is called Relation Shots. We've linked to some of his videos already, and you can get these links in the description and in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us, Eric. We'll see you next time.
You bet. Good to see you guys again. See you soon.
Likewise. Bye. All right.
Good stuff as usual.
Yeah.
Eric's a good guest, man.
Yeah,
really wonderful.
Some of my favorite episodes are with him for sure, and it brings us to our challenge for today. But I want to make sure to point out that one of our challenges was on this previous episode 51. I said back then that I thought it was the most important challenge that we had up to that point, and I think that actually still might be the case, because episode 51 was the one talking about personal responsibility. And the challenge then was look at yourself in the mirror a little bit and think and give yourself a little bit of time to reflect and say, hey, what is it like to be in a relationship with me? And what are some of the good things that I bring, but also maybe what are some of the bad things that I bring? And I feel like that's a question that a lot of people maybe haven't really asked themselves and they haven't really looked inside to see. But I think it's very important because guess what? No matter where you go, you're taking you with you. So if you want to really bring your best to your relationships, whether it's romantic, whether it's work, whether it's friends, whether it's family, if you want to have the best relationships you can and have the best life you can, and oh, by the way, it's actually kind of selfish in a way because by bringing your best self, your life is going to be easier. You're going to make other people around you better. And then they will have less problems and cause less problems for you. So, it may seem like the weird thing to say, but it's actually more valuable to you to look inside than anybody else.
Yeah, there's something about seeing yourself clearly and, of course, being seen, right? A lot of how we determine our behavior is based off seeing how others react to us, right? And so just sort of being aware of those moments and just sort of being like, yeah, am I easy to be in a relationship with? Am I easy to be friends with? Am I a good employee because of the way I interact with other people? There's so many problems in the world are actually interpersonal problems. Then we can blame a lot of things on systems, but a lot of times it is weird how the systems can be bypassed. If you're actually a really nice person or something, you bring value in other ways. And so there is something about people who basically claim to be really good at their job, but they keep getting fired because they're so bad at these other sort of softer aspects. So, looking at yourself in the mirror on occasion, just sort of being like, why does this keep happening? Because once it's a pattern, sometimes it's other people, and then sometimes it's not. Right. But we don't like to change, so we often try to push that off and use excuses that it's everyone else's fault that these things keep happening to us.
Yes. So again, I'll bring up the 3 pillars of for Altered Marriage because I think they're very valuable and I stand behind them. They were community, intentionality, and personal responsibility. So today we it's kind of tied to the personal responsibility. As we said, it's kind of the opposite side of the coin is setting boundaries. And so as we talked about the boundaries and how to set them, and hey, maybe if I'm not a non-confrontational person, how can I set boundaries in a way that doesn't make me too uncomfortable, but it still is helping me get to where I want to go. And we referenced one of Eric's videos and linked it in the chat, so you can check that one out, 3 levels of boundaries or something like that. But that brings us to our challenge for today. So before I rattle something off, do you have something around boundaries that you think would be a good challenge for today?
No, I have some. Maybe repair some.
Yeah. So, with the personal responsibility one, the challenge was to look at yourself, right? And ask and look in the mirror and say, hey, what are the things about me that I can do? Well, a good next step with that could be going and having that conversation with somebody, right? And maybe that's repairing some boundaries that were set previously. Maybe that's having a conversation about boundaries. And, can you imagine if someone came up to you and said, like, hey, Ryder, like, you're very important to me, and I really value having you in my life, and I want you to continue to be a part of my life. What are the boundaries that I can help set up so we can have our relationship be better and we can go into the future? Because, I just learned from this awesome show, What the Hell is Water, that this could be important, and this could help us learn, this could help us grow. And I'm taking the personal responsibility to bring this to you. And I want you to tell me, like, what are some things that maybe I could use some boundaries on? Are there some ways maybe I've been talking to you that doesn't make you feel good? Or maybe are there some times where I'm not showing up when you wish I would? Or maybe there's times when I'm showing up too much. Whatever it may be, I'm open, and I want you to tell me something. And hey, let's start small, because I don't want to try and do all the things at once, because that's not sustainable. That's not going to realistically, we're not going to change all of these things at once. But let's start that conversation. So maybe, what is one thing that you think could be a healthy boundary for us to have?
Yeah, that's a great way to start a conversation. It's very open and vulnerable. And it might take, if you're not comfortable with that kind of speaking, that can be a difficult one to jump into. But man, asking a big, broad question like that and just being open to whatever is going to come at you, it's tough, but it might be really one of the only ways to sort of maintain some relationships long term. There's other relationships that it's just easy and everything syncs up and you're just flowing along. The difficult part with those relationships is when you do hit a snag and you've never had these conversations, then you're just like, what happened? What went wrong? Because you're just like in a groove and you got thrown off your groove. So, yeah, if you can, I think, approach that conversation, be very open with it, man, it could do some lovely things. Also, someone like me who's not accustomed to those emotional conversations, whenever somebody comes up and they're very open with me like that, my first instinct is run. Like, get the hell out. And so, sometimes for me, it's like, okay, sit here. This is fine. Move through that. So I'm just throwing out some different ways of thinking about this. So yeah, just when you're going to encounter that conversation about boundaries or about how you can help somebody else with a relationship, just sort of be aware people are going to be coming from different places. That conversation may not go the way you thought it would go. And just be okay with that.
Right. Set your expectations, low, and recognize, like, hey, you're starting from the ground floor, or maybe you're actually even starting below ground. Like, you could be coming from a negative spot, right? So don't expect to go to this higher level without there being some sort of friction, right? So you expect from the beginning that there's going to be issues, there's going to be setbacks, that those boundaries are going to be triggered, those consequences are going to need to happen. Expect that from the beginning and put that into the plan. And most importantly, let us know how it goes, and let us know the struggles you come up with, the questions you have, because we're here to help. I mean, we're called Helpful for Life. That is literally our job. So come let us know how it's going for you, how these conversations go, what was good, what was bad. And also, I want to point out, maybe for this challenge, if that is really scaring the crap out of you, having that conversation, especially like you have in your mind, like, I know I really need to do this with person A. Well, maybe if this is your first time doing it and it's very uncomfortable for you, go have a lower stakes conversation with somebody else, right? And maybe it's just like, hey, Steve, I know we've had those good times in the garage, but maybe we need to set a bit of a boundary with a friend, it's something that's like a lot lower stakes, and so starting with that and using that as a way to kind of practice and get that conversation out there. And then maybe you can even have that conversation with that friend, like, hey, Bob, man, this dude Reed was telling me this stuff, and we think we'd talk about boundaries and stuff. Isn't that silly? And then you can commiserate over it and say how dumb and silly it is, and then maybe have a little conversation about it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can approach it however, but I do like that idea of starting off small. I thought that was a really good point that Eric brought up.
Yes. And then the other thing I was going to say is, man, maybe you're just like, I can't even bring myself to start. Like, this may sound silly to some people, but maybe this is something that could work. If you sit down with that person, you say, hey, I heard this thing and I think it could be very useful for us, but I'm not really I'm not good with words, and I feel really weird saying this, but I think it's important for us to have this conversation. Play a clip, play this challenge to them, and just say, hey, look, here's what I'm trying to do. I can't say it, in the way that big young whippersnapper can say it with all them flexible, fancy words. Man.
Spry mind.
Spry mind, spry heart, spry spirit. You know what they say. Triple spry.
Is that what they say?
I'll supersize that spry. Extra salt.
Double down.
Well, clearly my coffee is needing a refill because we're making up stuff here. But thank you guys so much for joining us today. Hopefully this was valuable to you. And you know what? If this was valuable to you, it's probably valuable to someone else in your life. So share this with somebody. Just send them the link. Send them. You can, when you're sharing on YouTube, especially if you're on a computer, you can actually click a timestamp and you can say, hey, send them this clip and have it start at 5 minutes and 34 seconds. And then you can be like, hey, I thought this was a really good part. So we will also be sharing clips ourselves, but we encourage you guys to do it too. And feel free to tweet us or Instagram us or whatever all those fancy words are the younger kids than me are using. Make sure to tag us Helpful for Life in whatever you're doing, and feel free to engage with us on those platforms as well. Well, with that, Ryder, any last sage wisdom before we sign off for the weekend?
Have fun this weekend.
Have fun this weekend. Yeah. I agree. I think
sage
that's a good
wisdom
one.
Right there.
Yes. He's so sagely. Next time maybe
I think Aristotle said that.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. Have fun this weekend.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Happy Friday, guys.
Bye.